Since the Senate spends all of its time these days confirming assistant secretaries, I thought I would lead off today by talking about something a little different. I had Secretary General Stoltenberg from NATO in my office this morning, along with some other colleagues, giving an update on the latest in the European theater. Some of the good news is he hopes and expects Sweden will be admitted at the Vilnius meeting in early July. He says the Germans are likely to hit 2% of their GDP for defense soon. He also feels that there's an Asian component, and he's invited Japan, South Korea to come to the NATO meeting in Vilnius in early July. Clearly, there's a sort of worldwide implication to democracies banding together to stand up to the threats that are down the road. Clearly, the Ukrainians winning this war is extremely important. He pointed out the European countries are doing a lot more than Americans think they are in terms of not only military equipment, but actually outrank us in humanitarian assistance. So his view is the Europeans are pulling their weight in this war, and is, of course, grateful for American leadership. My own view, as I've expressed before, is if the president had acted a little bit sooner all along the way, we'd be better in shape. We'd be in better shape than we are. But we all wish the Ukrainians well in this counteroffensive and hope they will succeed.
Last week I talked about Julie Su, who is a nominee to the Department of Labor, Secretary of Labor under President Biden. I'm still hopeful that the administration will think better and not try and force a vote on her nomination. This week's bad nominee hit is Jared Bernstein to be chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Jared Bernstein is somebody who doesn't have experience or any training, at least, in economics. He'd be the first chairman of that position in its 80-year history. His degree is in music and social welfare, but more importantly than all that is he was the architect of a lot of the big spending sprees that Democrats have embarked upon in the last couple of years. The Inflation Reduction Act, for example, and you know, if you look at what's impacting the American people today, 9 out of 10 Americans are worried about higher prices. In fact, it's the #1 issue for both Democrats and Republicans. He described inflation as transitory. Obviously, as I said, was behind all the big spending that the Democrats have done. He's also come out and said that we ought to pay more, or fossil fuel should cost more for the American people. And that's not at all what we think. We think if you want to drive down costs for the American people, the way to do that is to unleash American energy production, not to have the government spending more and taxing more, but getting government out of the way and allowing the American people to keep more of what they earn. One of his other proposals is to tax the unrealized gains, capital gains, if you can imagine that. He's called that idea inspired and something that this country desperately needs to do. I don't think most Americans think that they ought to be paying taxes on gains they haven't even realized yet. But that's how far out of the mainstream a lot of these nominees are. And Jared Bernstein is just the latest in that long hit list of the administration's bad nominees that they're putting before the Senate. That vote's coming up here at 2:15. I hope there'll be some right-thinking Democrats who will opt against somebody who is clearly has all the wrong views on energy, the wrong views on inflation, the wrong views on spending, and the wrong views on taxing, and vote in favor of the American people.
Joe Biden and the Democrats continue to weaken America and undermine our nation's security. I saw it this past weekend in Wyoming at the Wyoming Stock Growers Association and the Wyoming Mining Association. These are the men and women who go to work day in and day out to put food on our tables and also make sure that the lights come on when you turn on the switch. They work very hard, and yet their paychecks continue to get eaten away. And as we saw in new inflation numbers today, costs continue to go up. $880 per month more the cost of living compared to the day that Joe Biden came into the White House. And it's not surprising given the Democrats' attacks on American energy. You saw the headlines last week that said energy costs would go up this summer. That headline was tied to the fact that Saudi Arabia is cutting production of oil by 1 million barrels a day. And yet Joe Biden continues to kowtow to the climate extremists and blocking the production of American energy. If you talk to any of the ranchers at the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, they will tell you when energy costs go up, the cost of producing food goes up, and the cost at the grocery stores go up as well. At the Wyoming Mining Association, it was very clear that it still takes 10 years to get a permit to mine for the minerals that are critical to our economy. Joe Biden doesn't care, to the point that just this past week, he genuflected again to the climate extremists and permanently shut down a mine that produces nickel and copper, minerals critical to our American energy economy. Look, this is the same president that wants every American driving an expensive electric car, and the minerals for those vehicles continues to come from China. So what you've seen here is 1 week in Joe Biden's America. Saudi Arabia pushing Joe Biden aside because they know that he can't do anything and won't do anything in terms of energy production. You see China smiling because Joe Biden is going to make their minerals much more valuable. And you see the American public suffering from higher and higher cost. Republicans have solutions, including a bill of my own, to unleash American energy, to produce more minerals, critical minerals for our economy. That is the way to make our economy as well as our national security stronger.
This morning, I and a group of other senators were able to meet with a number of ambassadors that were representing Pacific Island nations. And in that discussion, there was one common theme that kept popping up between the senators and these ambassadors. That common theme was China. And it was the pressures coming from China on those nations. Well, folks, we see China here in the United States and really everywhere around the globe right now. And right now, President Biden is asleep at the wheel. So we can see China and their malign influence in a number of ways. There's just a few I can name off now. One is that China has been aiding and abetting the flow of fentanyl from Mexico up into the United States of America. And we know the scourge that fentanyl is on all of our communities. A second example is that China is purchasing ag land across the United States. And in one specific example, China purchased land surrounding a U.S. military installation. A third example, China has established a spy base in Cuba, just 90 miles away from mainland United States of America. I could go on and on and on about the examples where China is taking advantage of weak leadership here in the United States of America. All you have to do is take a look at President Joe Biden's national security strategy. In that NSS, President Biden mentions China only 9 times. And yet he mentions climate 63 times. You can see where President Biden's focus is. Not the threat of China, but more on climate and his agenda. So we need strong American leadership, and unfortunately, right now, it's lacking coming out of the White House.
Thank you all for being here. I'd like to talk today about something that hits every single one of our states. Whether you're a rural state like mine or whether you're a more urban state like some of the other urban states, everybody has pockets of America that does not have vibrant broadband service. We are lacking it, and we saw a lot during the COVID experience that areas that didn't have broadband fell further and further behind, whether in education, whether in delivery of health care, whether in the ability for workers to work from home. And so the good news is the FCC has completed their exercise on determining which homes and businesses all across this country have either service or have adequate service. And these maps are really essential because there's a lot of money that's going to be going out here shortly that's going to be going to every single state. And if your state has, like our state did, we had over 120 challenges to the original map, 120,000 challenges that we thought were inaccurate. And in reality, the FCC recognized that 80,000 of those 120,000 were actually unserved or underserved areas, which means that the dollars that are coming out that are targeted for unserved and underserved are going to be going to our states. And this is an exceedingly important issue, not just for today, but for tomorrow, in every aspect of our lives. Whether you're in Iowa and you're doing agriculture, you need good broadband. Whether you're in South Dakota, in our states like Kentucky and West Virginia, there is so much that is left undone and left behind because of this lack of broadband service. So as these maps move forward and as the dollars move forward, it is our job to make sure that the opportunity is not squandered, that the goal of which going to every single business and every single residence is fulfilled, and that this nation in its entirety, no matter where you live or how much you make or what kind of equipment you have, that you have the broadband service that you deserve.
Last week, I was flying back home to Montana, had a connecting flight out west. I got off the flight in Denver, and I met one of the leaders of the Navajo tribe from the southwest part of the United States. They were livid about what was about to happen in Washington, D.C. I hope that some of you will cover this story. I challenge you, I dare you to cover this story. Let me tell you what happened. Quietly, this past weekend, President Biden's Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, issued a mineral withdrawal that prohibited oil and gas development for the Navajo people for the next 20 years, despite strong opposition from the Navajo leadership. This isn't just another hit to U.S. energy production. It is a devastating financial blow to the Navajo people. Many of these allotees live literally in small trailers. Some do not have running water or even electricity. The average income is $20,000 a year. These additional allotments for the oil and gas production would bring in an extra $28,000 a year. In other words, more than doubling their income. This is poverty in America with the Navajo people. The president of the Navajo tribe, President Nygren, said this, and I quote, "The Secretary's action jeopardizes future economic opportunities, placing some 5,600 Navajo allottees in dire financial constraints." This is just yet another attack on Made in America energy. Look at the EPA's new proposed carbon emission standards that will completely crush power plants. I hope we learned a lesson from the Germans, is you can't shut down baseload power, nuclear plants and coal plants without experiencing consequences of higher energy costs and dependencies on adversaries. These EPA standards will cost us 600 good-paying jobs in Montana. They power about 1.1 million homes. They're heavy-handed, they're anti-energy, they risk grid reliability and raising the price of utility bills for the American people. If we continue down this path of radically, unilaterally shutting down energy production, whether it's Secretary Holland and the Navajo or the Biden's EPA, there'll be a day we do not have enough reliable, affordable power to meet our energy needs, when over the next 25 years, the world will need 50% more energy than it needs today.
Given that the former president is facing a federal indictment and these serious allegations, could you still support him if he becomes the nominee, even if he's convicted?
Well, look, the Republican campaign for the nomination has already been going on for 6 months. It's going to be going on for a year longer. And I'm just simply not going to comment on the candidates. We've got a bunch of them, and I'm just simply going to stay out of it.
What about the indictment?
Alex?
Senator McConnell, the House Appropriations Chairwoman says she's going to mark up the spending bills at the fiscal year 2022 levels. Should the House stick with the debt limit deal spending levels, and could this lead to an impasse over getting the government funded later this year?
Well, look, we're going to move forward. The House will allocate the 302Bs. The Senate will as well. And at the end, we'll have to work it out. But it's not totally uncommon for these to be different as they move through the process. And I think that's what's probably going to happen this time.
Your reaction to the indictment as we've seen so far of the former president, and did he do something wrong in your view?
Look, I simply, as I said earlier, am not going to start commenting on the various candidates we have running for president. There are a lot of them. It's going to be interesting to watch, and I'll look forward to seeing your coverage.